Well, it's funny too, because one of our fears as Catholics is we don't want to sound Protestant. And I actually don't understand this fear completely, in the sense, like, the fear should be we don't want to speak something that's not true. But this fear of sounding like I'm sure you've heard, like, that sounds Protestant. It's like, well, what do you mean? Is it true? Like, because
does it sound like it's protesting the church? Because like, what do you mean by that word?
Because maybe they've actually shared the gospel in a way that is true. Not saying that every Protestant shares the gospel in the fullness in a true way, but sometimes there are ways to convey the good news of the gospel that is true and good. And we haven't heard it explained that way in a Catholic context, but it's living and active in the Catholic tradition, right? That, well, no, this is actually true. Let me show you where John Paul II says this in this encyclical. Let me show you where this is broken up and developed in the catechism. Let me show you where this is found in the church fathers. Let me show you where this is developed, not in one verse in the scriptures, but throughout the whole context of salvation history. And so we don't want to react to fear. We want to respond to truth, and we want to wrestle with the truth. And I think one of the hardest things of wrestling with the truth is, so even this podcast is going to fall short of the fullness, because in an hour podcast, we can't explain everything, right? And a lot of times, someone who's proclaiming the gospel, you're given 25 minutes for your talk, right? How am I going to proclaim the fullness of the gospel that has been developed over, thousands of years of salvation history? How am I going to convey that fully, perfectly, entirely in 25 minutes, right? So we do it in a way that is not always 100% comprehensive, but in a way that seeks to develop parts of the gospel and emphasize certain aspects. But when we proclaim the gospel, it should put us on our knees to pray and to pray. And it has been my deepest prayer for the last 4 years. Lord, when I proclaim the gospel, I want to make sure what I'm doing is accurate. And I like wrestling with and praying, what is the best way? How do you convey the fullness of truth in the limited words and time I have, right? And it's a challenge. And there's real biblical consequences to false teachers, right? Like to the extent of false teachers should fear hell, because there's real, especially with us, we work primarily with young people. There's real biblical contexts for leading the young astray. And so like, wow, let's get on our knees and beg the Lord. I don't want to be inaccurate here. That the proclamation of the gospel is a holy thing, and we take it serious.
Wait, but you said something important there, right? You said, we don't want to be inaccurate here, not we want to be accurate here. Because that comes in with the pretense that, Lord, I want what I want to be true. But instead it's, I don't want to be inaccurate, Lord, teach me.
Yeah.
Right? The word disciple comes from the word learner. There's a humility that has to come for anyone that's going to teach on the good news. The reality is, the more I know I know nothing. It's just true. The more that I dive into the depths of our faith, I'm like, I don't know anything. And Lord, you know everything. So let me be the learner, right? Underneath you, right? So like, help me in any way to let go of anything I've held on to before in the infinite good of knowing you.
And how does one, as Jesus, it says he spoke and he preached as one who had authority. And then he gives us the authority through the teachings of the church,
of course,
to proclaim the kingdom and to proclaim the good news, to proclaim these teachings with authority as well, through his own authority. And it's hard to be in such humility and to preach with authority at the same time. It's just, once again, biblical tension that we have to wrestle with and not avoid, but deal with. And how, Aaron, when you're striving to proclaim the gospel, what is your heart going through to make sure that you're speaking the fullness of truth in a way that gives God justice?
I had a beautiful moment of conviction once where somebody said, don't go to the chapel in order to prepare a talk, right? Don't go and spend your time with the Lord trying to prepare a message. But I think that where I find myself and where I would encourage others to seek would be like, spend your time and focus entering, like, let me get my relationship with the Lord right. Let me pour into a place where I can operate from that heart of humility, where I can operate from that heart of hunger, right? That I would desire to be formed, that I would seek that fruit. And and minister from that place, as opposed to ministering in an attempt to try to prove something.
Yes.
When we're trying to articulate or prove something that we aren't yet experiencing, or we aren't yet like, I don't know. I find myself oftentimes when I preach, inviting people into my process instead of trying to present myself as someone who's figured it out. And I think that aspect of perpetual discipleship, right? I am constantly a student here. Like, don't believe for a minute that this message isn't going to be revised in a week or an hour, because I'm constantly learning about something. And I think that honest humility when it comes to preparation and presentation goes a long way.
Yeah. And that's Paul too. Just exactly what you were just saying in Philippians 3. And then I'll throw it back to you, Dan. But just exactly what you were saying has scriptural evidence, Aaron, where Paul says, it's not that I have already taken hold of it or have already attained perfect maturity. Yeah. Right? He's saying, I'm instructing you in a way that's welcoming you into this walk with Jesus Christ with me, right? Like it's right after he just lets, like we know Philippians, right? But it's whatever gains I had, I consider these as loss. And he's just saying, like, I don't even know fully how to explain this, but I can tell you this, like, I haven't taken perfect hold of it, but what I have taken hold of is good. Yeah. Follow me.
Well, and let me say that's one side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is, like, you've got to do the work.
Yeah, sure.
You've got to do the work.
Yeah. Don't use it as an excuse.
There's a lot of times that we can speak with authority because we are laying hold of the authority that's been given to us, right? So the Catholic Church has myriad riches in the church of the work that's been done before us.
Dogma,
we
doctrine.
stand on the shoulders of giants who've thought this stuff through, who've wrestled it out, and as we exert our effort in aligning ourselves to those who've really fought this fight on our behalf, there's an incredible strength there.
And that's the gold. We have the magisterium that gives us, if you will, the sidelines, so that when we're playing this, like, and proclaiming the kingdom, I may run the ball this way, or I may run the ball this way, and that may look different than the way this person runs the ball. But as long as we're both in the sidelines, we're in good shape. It's when we step outside of the sidelines, and that's where our Protestant brothers and sisters, they don't have the sidelines, if you will, through the grace of the church, the grace of the magisterium, to give us our guidance. But it takes work. I remember when I was a senior in high school and I submitted my life to Jesus Christ. It was, I went through this moment where because I had been picking and choosing what I wanted to believe in Catholicism, to the extent that I actually had a journal where I was creating my own dogmas and doctrines, where I would write down what I believed. And the church, I was planning on starting my own church someday. And
do you still have it?
I don't. I have no idea. And to be completely honest, there wasn't that many pages filled because I was lazy. But I remember this moment where I said, Jesus, I'm going to assume everything in the church is absolutely right. And I'm going to become a disciple to learn it. That my starting point is you're right and I'm wrong. Let's learn. And it changed everything.
Yeah. Well, could you imagine, I want to use your analogy with the sidelines in the game, right? Could you imagine, choose any sport of your liking, right? Imagine soccer, football, basketball. Could you imagine if in that sport, though, you were so afraid to get close to the sideline that you just played in the middle of the field? You would be a bad team. You wouldn't score because you wouldn't explore the robust opportunity that comes outside of what you currently know. It's just
well
an invitation for us
Brad.
to get to like a lot of times, right? Like the best, again, like just from my own experience, basketball, one of the things you do if you get a defensive rebound is you encourage those who are going to be the outlet pass to get to the sideline.
Yeah.
And then to run it up the court because it expands. It just expands your opportunity. Yeah. And again, like, I just want to speak that, like, in our walk with the Lord, we've all experienced times where we're like, oh, that's actually an area where I'm not fully right yet. Or even like I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And that's okay though. Cause like even in the game, if you step out of bounds, there's a turnover, but then you step back into the play. As long as we continue to come back to the Lord, as long as we continue to come back to Mother Church and let her instruct us, I think there's,
So here's an interesting nuance with this that I'm sure somebody has taught more effectively on it, but with that sense of tradition and that sense of magisterial authority, right? with tradition can come baggage. So why is it that we're afraid of sounding Protestant, right? You know, to use that terminology. It's because for whatever reason, like we've taken our eye off the field. We're not even aware of the actual sidelines. We're actually more worried about the baggage associated with history.
Sometimes we're just playing defense and we don't have an offensive game at all.
And what's really curious, Dan, so, and again, I don't speak as one who is perfectly informed, but as I have interacted with various non-Catholic organizations over the last number of years, you see that churches, that denominations that have a longer history have more baggage that prevents them from actually effectively engaging. So a lot of the mainline Protestant groups, for example, they have very similar perspectives that I don't want to do X, Y, Z because it would be too Catholic, right? Whereas a lot of times you see, newer non-denominational, for example, faith churches that are coming up that you'll go in and you'll have a conversation and you'll say, okay, so what are the works that are forming the foundation for your church and your practice? And they'll hand you a list of Catholic mystics, right? Describe your understanding of the Eucharist. They'll articulate it more closely to the Catholic understanding of transubstantiation than maybe most Catholics are able to articulate. You know, that's not a hard and fast rule.
No, sure.
But when you step outside of the fear of man and of the baggage associated with maybe the negative experience that we've had in the past, you're able to actually see the field for what it is and pursue truth instead of trying to maintain some image.
Yeah. That's brilliant. I love that. And I think that's the Catholic tradition is a tradition of tension, right? That proclaims the already not yet kingdom of God and the both and, like, right? That they're always, it's this beautiful, in our tradition, we have tension that we wrestle with these mysteries. Whereas sometimes in our practice today, it can just become an either or. And that's where we actually become, it's where we can get outside of the sidelines. Actually, we can accidentally fall outside of our own teaching when we become either or.